I'd like to do now is go ahead and examine some of the individual pairs and their typical rhythms, because we've looked at the Aussie US dollar, we've looked at the Euro US dollar. I wanted something that was a calm dollar that traded in Asia and contrast that to the most popular pair traded, the Euro US dollar. Let's take a look at some of the other pairs that are commonly traded and take a look at their rhythm. Now, you notice I'm looking at the Euro US dollar right now over the past 6 months. Remember that this is a larger sample size here. When you go down to and by the way, look at the price scale, 0 to 55. Okay, and then take a look at the type of movement we've seen over the last 1 month. Quite different, right? Here's the last 1 month. Here's the last 6 months. So remember that you can actually zoom in and get a better idea of what the activity's been over the past 30 days versus the last half year. And there will be differences depending upon reduced volatility, increased volatility, the types of economic reports and their results this month versus the average of the past 6 months. Okay? Take a peek at at the British pound US dollar. Now we've looked at the fact that a lot of these pairs will have an increase during the European UK session, but none of them really had the same kind of reaction, if not greater, than the US. So notice here that not only do we have an increase that occurs, in this case, again, on the British pound US dollar, we have that increase that occurs with the hours between 2, 3, and 4 o'clock. And then again, we see it pronounced really again between 9, 10, and 11 o'clock. This is the last 1 month. Okay? The cable is one of those pairs that if you are one of those traders that gets up at 2 a.m. Eastern, you'll see the increase in the movement as we go from Asia only to Asia plus Frankfurt. Okay, then Asia, Frankfurt, London. You'll see that a very dramatic increase, the same one that we see during the New York session, almost a little bit more. The reason I bring up the cable is because this is one of the few pairs that's dollar correlated that actually does this. Most of your dollar correlated pairs does have a pickup between about 1:30, 2 o'clock, leading into 3 o'clock a.m. And then it does it again, but to a greater degree between 8, 9, 10, and 11 o'clock. So the rhythm of the cable is a little bit different. You have to remember that each pair has a personality, even when it's trading against the dollar index. So I'm not going to assume the cable is going to move the same as the Euro US dollar, the fiber. I'm not going to assume that the cable is going to move the same as the dollar yen, or that the dollar yen is going to move the same as the Euro US dollar. Take a look at each one, and then you might want to take a look at the 6 month versus the 1 month and see what the differences are between the last 6 months of psychology and the averaged in historical movement versus the last 1 month and the current market mood. But the cable is very commonly that pair that I find, just an experience in talking to other traders, that I find that most of your 2 a.m. type traders are looking at the pound US dollar or different pairs that trade against the pound sterling. So if I want to take a look at a different pair that trades against the pound sterling, I can take a look at something like, well, we can take a look at the pound yen. Same type of action. I'm not a big fan of this. I'm not a big fan of the pound yen. I don't mind it. All pairs are potential opportunities. I acknowledge that. But just remember, if you're getting into the pound yen, you're looking at a lot of volatility. Okay? So the pound yen does that same thing. Here's that pickup 2, 3 a.m. Here's that pickup again 8, 9, and you'll see that the European UK Open really is about the same as the US. And again, what I'm contrasting this to is the Euro US dollar and other dollar correlated majors. Notice that usually, just by a little bit, the US market will see a little bit more pickup in volatility than the Europe UK, but not so with certain pound related pairs. Here's the pound Swissy. Here's the pound sterling Swiss franc. To consider who is interested. One of the things that we'll talk about is who's awake. That's what we consider when we're looking at the different financial center overlaps. Which financial centers are awake? Another question is who is concerned, or who cares about the pairs, the individual currencies within the pair. I have the pound sterling here, the Swiss franc here. This is really a pair that certainly people in the UK and Europe are going to be focused in on. London and Switzerland, right? So if I'm thinking about England, if I'm thinking about Switzerland, I'm thinking about the UK, I'm thinking about Europe, is it any surprise that we see the pickup that we see, 2, 3, 4 o'clock, actually more volatile from the high to low range than 8, 9, 10? It's not that the U.S. session doesn't have an impact on the pound Swissy. It's just that are traders in the U.S. necessarily as concerned about the relationship between the sterling and the franc, again, during these hours, than they are right during the open of Europe and of the UK. You can see it's still actively traded because up until 11, 12 o'clock, Frankfurt and London are still open, and they're overlapping with the U.S. But the impact of the U.S. market opening doesn't necessarily have the same type of impact as the European and the UK markets opening. So again, understand the rhythm of each one of the pairs and ask yourself, who's awake in terms of financial centers, and who's concerned, who cares about these individual pairs? Who are the people that are most interested in what happens in the relationship between the two currencies of a pair? We can take a look at the same thing with here's a dollar yen. Let's take a look at that pair. Here's a dollar yen over the last 1 month. Take a look at the pip movement. It's a quiet pair, is it not? And then take a look at over the last 6 months. It's been a little bit more volatile, especially during that 8 o'clock to about 11 o'clock chunk of the day. Obviously, this is a dollar correlated pair. There's a good degree of movement that you'll see from this pair that correlates back to U.S. equities. But the bottom line is, more or less, this is a fairly quiet pair compared to many of the others. And the bulk of the movement in terms of volatility is between 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock. It drops off as Frankfurt and London leave the party. And even Asia is fairly quiet, interestingly enough. Here's a 1 month view. So you would think there might be a little bit more movement in Asia than we see during the hours between 2 and 4. And again, the hours between 8 and 11. You'd think there'd be a little bit more movement. So what does this mean? Even if I'm trading the dollar yen during what we would consider to be a fairly important session for yen-related pairs, yen-correlated pairs, really the market doesn't start to pick up until Frankfurt and London open, and then again we see the volatility in the U.S. So far, this idea of getting up at 2 a.m. really only works, really only applies, I think, consistently to pound sterling related pairs. So again, this is about working in the timing. I know some of you love getting up early in the morning. I've heard that from many of you. Would that then mean it's a good time to possibly consider pound sterling related pairs? Absolutely. That's what this information is pointing to. And even yen related pairs may not be that volatile during the Asian session, as we can see here. Here's a euro yen. Same idea. Fairly quiet Asia, pick up in Europe and UK, big pickup in the US.